Hey, welcome back. I wanted to talk to you today a little bit about the Puer Aeternus, otherwise known as the manchild, Peter Pan syndrome, or more recently, kidult. Refers to an ancient mythological theme of the eternal youth, or one who never grows old. Ovid first wrote about the Puer Aeternus in the Metamorphoses, but the motif of the mischievous god-child reaches across many cultures, including ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, India, the Near and even the Far East. So the modern usage of the term was popularised by Carl Jung and exponents of Jungian psychology when they were referring to an adult man who retained the behavioural and emotional characteristics of an adolescent. It's no accident that the play by J.M. Barrie carries the name Peter Pan, as Pan, the mythological half-goat, half-man, was described as betwixt and between, neither man nor boy. So what are some of the characteristics of Peter Pans that are very typical? So they tend to have a carefree, romanticised attitude to the future. They have a shirking of all responsibility. They have a resistance to boundaries and any kind of restriction on their personal freedoms. They tend to find it impossible to make and or keep commitments. And they tend to have a propensity for laziness and procrastination. Emotionally, PAs tend to act entitled, driven by an excessive attention and affection, usually by their mothers. They become expert at manipulating and obtaining affection from people all around them. Charming and pleasant, they're often very good-natured, which makes them appear attractive, but they rarely take any serious interest in anyone or anything but themselves. Any conversation is usually very quickly redirected to their own interests or their own self-obsessions. They fantasize about grand schemes and ideas, but they lack the self-discipline and fortitude, as well as the sustained effort to achieve success on their own merits. They expect others around them to carry their load for them, and when their schemes tend to fail, as they inevitably do, they live on other people's credit. They expect them to finance them. And all of this behaviour tends to lead towards confabulation, false bravado, claiming credit that's not their due. And it's a mechanism that they use to hide or deflect their real inferiority complexes. When they're challenged, they have a narcissistic tendency to deflection and externalise blame, never holding themselves accountable or growing from past experiences. Jung wrote that PAs, or Peter Pans, tend to have what he called a mother complex, an excessive dependence on the attachment, safety and security that the mother provides. Marie-Louise von Franz, a prominent Jungian psychologist, wrote that the late 20th century had seen a rapid increase in the number of PA men, as they no longer left home in their teens to work and take on the world, but stayed at home into their 30s, enjoying the comforts, security, and a life without responsibility or personal sacrifice. As our society moves away from traditional values and established roles, the breakup of the nuclear family as well as community coherence continues to gradually worsen. Men are exerting less influence on their sons, their nephews and their grandsons, and young men are much more exposed to the influence of women than other men. In the case of single mothers, their increasing responsibility in the absence of the father forces her to adopt traditionally male roles. However, the result is often that a boy's view of manhood becomes inherently maternally filtered. The problem is further compounded by the nature of our education systems, which are increasingly shaping views of masculinity according to postmodern and feminist doctrine, which views masculinity as inherently toxic. Biologically normal behaviours such as cultivating physical strength, strenuous competition through sport, establishing and challenging dominance hierarchies through peer socialization, and the teaching of fighting skills or cultivating stoic virtues are dismissed as anachronistic and even sinister. The result is an indolent, self-indulgent and narcissistic male who lacks the ability to see things through to completion and the fortitude to weather the storms of adversity or the courage to make difficult decisions. The Peter Pan individual has been described as one who, like a child, is full of potential, but actually is nothing. Maturity involves sacrificing the carefree potentiality of childhood and focusing on developing competence in order that you might become something. That's to say, by becoming competent, you open up a whole new world of possibilities, such as becoming an employer, a leader, a teacher, or other responsible male adult role model. The sacrifice usually plays itself out during adolescent apprenticeships or military service, but today is increasingly absent. By rejecting this sacrifice towards competence, the Peter Pan type remains in a plenipotential state, incapable of commitment or personal growth. So the impact on his personal life compounds in severity the older he gets and the more he starts to fall behind. So at some point in his 30s or 40s, he becomes increasingly viewed as pathetic rather than, in his opinion, carefree. While other men have gone on to committed relationships, careers, and civic responsibility, he gradually becomes a social pariah, living in his own bubble, ridiculed by those of his own social group. The outcome of this is that he gravitates increasingly towards a much younger social group, who eventually start to view him as creepy. So what purpose is there in considering this subject? If we look at some of the typical characteristics of a Peter Pan and then act to eliminate or minimize those in ourselves, we may find some avenue of personal growth that we hadn't considered before. So let's have a look at some more of their typical characteristics. Peter Pans tend to have no domestic skills, whether it be laundry, cleaning, cooking, or even around the house maintenance. So in other words, they have very little independence or self-reliance. They have a tendency to play a lot of video games or involve themselves in other types of distractions. They never pay bills on time and they tend to rack up a lot of fines. They can't keep a job for any reasonable length of time and they tend to blame everyone and everything for losing it. They can't handle conflict or a crisis, so they tend to break down very easily when challenged, or they tend to have lots of tantrums. And a really obvious physical sign is they dress like teenagers. Interestingly, the opposite psychological counterpart, according to Jung, was the senex, which is the Latin word for old man. Now, the characteristics of a senex are interesting. They tend to be disciplined, controlled, responsible, rational, and ordered. Now, while this may seem like it's a far more desirable set of traits than that in a Peter Pan, it should be remembered that the senex tends to lack spontaneity, creativity, and flexibility. So what can you do to break out of being a Peter Pan if you are one, or minimize your risk of your son becoming one? Get a job. Be grateful for it, even if you don't like it. Educate your way into something better if that's what you want. Never resign until you've landed a better one. Essentially, the solution centers around taking responsibility. The more responsibility you can bear, the greater your maturity will develop, but also the richer and the more meaningful your life will become. Start taking on more social responsibilities. Volunteer for something and give back to your community. Make and keep your commitments. When it comes to your sons, stop helicoptering them. Stop spoiling them and giving them what they ask for. Make them earn the objects of their desires through their own efforts. Give them tasks and make sure that they achieve it to your satisfaction. Ensure that there's something that they'll be proud of. Also, hold them and yourself accountable for promises and commitments. When you dole out punishment, be fair, but be resolute. The sooner they learn the law of consequence, the more successful they'll become. Teach your sons how to fish, how to shoot, and how to defend themselves. Let them experience the pain of defeat in competition, and don't lie to them about their abilities or lack thereof. Be encouraging, but be objective. Let them solve problems on their own, perhaps with some guidance, but don't overly do things for them or allow them to quit the moment things become hard. Some psychologists suggest that one of the contributing factors to the prevalence of PAs in our society is the staying at home of young men until well into their 20s and 30s. Their parents take care of all their material needs while their sons entertain themselves and amuse themselves with trivial distractions. Some advocate booting them out when they turn 18 to earn a wage. This has traditionally been man's greatest teacher. The problem is that our fears that our sons will lapse into drugs, bad company, alcohol, and end up dead or in jail are very poorly founded. The truth is that the vast majority of boys don't end up like that. However, if they're overly sheltered, they never end up developing the emotional muscle they need to compete and deal with the real world. For the women in your circle, teach them to identify a PA as early in their dating life as you can. Many women find PAs attractive at first, but over time, their lack of reliability, responsibility, and gravitas becomes a nightmare to them. PAs are fun and exciting, and like Wendy in the Peter Pan story, women love to be whisked away from perhaps their boring and mundane lives by a man who they find exciting and carefree. They often end up right back where they started, just like Wendy, alone, staring out through a window. Women in real life tend to lose all their money and all their career opportunities, having supported a Peter Pan in his ventures. Point out Peter Pans to your daughters in movies and discuss what their friendships are like so that they get to see them for what they really are. So there you have it. A bit of a brief introduction to the Peter Pan. Hopefully it's given you some ideas, given you something to think about, something to talk about, something to look at in your own life. And if there are characteristics like, for example, Gen X types like myself grew up with video games, and we tend to have a real interest and passion for them. But be aware that they can become such a distraction that you often lose sight of what's really important. Develop cooking skills, develop household skills so that you are truly independent as a man and can take care of yourself. Learn how to fish so you can teach your kids one day. Learn how to hunt so you can support a family if push comes to shove. And I know that's a controversial subject, but we live in controversial times. And as a man, you need to take it upon yourself to become a master at survival and taking care of the people that are around you. So if you've got any comments on today's video, please do leave them in the comment section below. Drop us a line, let us know what you think, whether you agree with me or not, and hopefully you'll correct some of those defects in your own character that you find unhelpful and point them out in others as well. So until next time, remember to walk tall, and we'll see you next video. Cheers.